We've seen this before. In the history of the great American experiment, extremist groups have risen to challenge our democracy. There were anti-Semitic fascists in the 1930s, the KKK, the John Birch Society. But each of these hate groups were opposed by the American president. Today, for the first time in our history, an American president embraces extremists and
stand back and stand by.
Donald Trump is refusing to accept the results of our democratic. It's dangerous, anti-American, and a threat to democracy unlike any in our history. Millions of Americans have fought to preserve and protect the freedoms Donald Trump now threatens. Now it's our turn, our duty to defend America. Not with guns or tanks, but with our votes. Trump or America, fight for America, vote. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
The Forum 2, exclusively on YouTube Live, weekdays from 9 a.m. until 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. We tackle the tough issues, political, social, cultural, and racial. It may not be what you expect to hear, but we will definitely give you what you need to know. Check out our website, theforum2.com. Call in live, 414-395-0484. Check us out. Good morning, welcome to the program. Today is Friday, October 16th, 2020. I think we're, 18 days away from the presidential election. I hope your minds are made up. Well, a lot of your minds are already made up because 15 million people have already voted. Assuming that those votes count, I think it looks good for Joe Biden. I would like to go into a little more depth about Vice President Joe Biden. We shouldn't have to do that. It should be pretty clear. You're not choosing between a Porsche and a Ferrari here, guys. And I really wish people didn't make it seem like the ideal person, the ideal candidate actually exists, because they do not. But at this point, it's good versus evil. And I don't know if you guys saw the town halls last night. I've heard everything there is to hear. I don't think that there's anything that the candidates can say that would change my mind. Well, of course there isn't, but there's shock value involved, and NBC is going to have some problems because Donald Trump not wanting to participate in a virtual debate, which is the responsible and smart things to do, because that's what everybody's doing nowadays. Like when we communicate, especially professionally, we're all communicating virtually. Like this is virtual communication. It is the way of the world. because we want to show and exercise a level of responsibility when it comes to the coronavirus. And if there's one person that simply refuses to wear a mask, okay, fair enough, then stay in your home and communicate with somebody virtually. This also should be looked at as an election for the soul of the American people, even though I don't think we know yet what our soul is. Are we a diverse nation that loves all people from all places? Do we appreciate the different things and different backgrounds that people contribute to our society? Or do we have this really rigid, sterile view of what America's supposed to be, this blind loyalty, this blind patriotism to people that have set the rules and those who are descended from those who set the rules? We have to figure out exactly what that is. And this election will determine where the strength of this nation is. Is the strength in the rigidity that has made life so difficult and so oppressive for some people? Or is the strength in the inclusion of people so we can figure out ever complex problems plaguing our world? It's one or the other. The reason why fascism is so easy, and I'm going to say it's easy because it tells people, and I don't want to bash anyone who doesn't have a higher level of education, because there's some really intelligent people that have never stepped foot in a college classroom. There's really intelligent people that have never completed high school. Let me be abundantly clear when I say that. But the ability to critically think and to push yourself intellectually is the most important thing about education. Education is not about reading a bunch of books and writing a bunch of reports and doing a bunch of projects and getting grades and being competitive with your classmates. It's about pushing yourself to know things about yourself and then to be able to understand complex things in our society. You don't go to college to get a job. And I know that that's contrary and antithetical to what we've been told, because back in my day, oh, what do you want to be? You want to be a doctor or a lawyer? And then automatically it's followed up with, well, this is how much schooling you're going to need. And I think that we sold that lie to subsequent generations of young people, saying, okay, if you want to do this job, go to school for this. And you may not even like this, but go to school for it. And then when you get out of school, you'll have a degree and then somebody's going to hire you. What we fail to tell people is that that job may not be there. The thing that you invested in and you got a bunch of student loans for, and people told you, you know, go to school and get an education, get a degree, and I don't know, business management was the hot thing. I was a sociology major. People thought I was stupid. Sure, when you're an idiot, well, they still say I'm stupid. But I found something that I enjoyed reading about, because it told me more about the world that I live in. It helped me better interpret a really unpredictable world that at times can be extremely hostile. And then lo and behold, and I didn't know this, and my parents didn't know this, and anybody else, you know, teachers and guidance counselors, if they even, do they still have guidance counselors? Who knows? They've cut everything else out of public education. They didn't know that the path that you're supposed to take, and I know I'm going off base here, but I'm laying a foundation for the rest of my rambling. Please bear with me. The key is find something that you love, whatever it is, no matter how ridiculous, no matter if people tell you it's not going to amount to anything and you're not going to amount to anything. Find what you love and study it vigorously. Let it become your art. And what will happen is you will find careers will come easy to you, because you are an expert in a subject matter that is your passion, and people will want you. They'll want you to work at their companies. They'll want you to help them and consult for them, et cetera, et cetera. But it's only through that discipline of finding what you love and studying it vigorously to where it becomes your art can you have a much more complex view of the world and how it works. That is what you gain through education. 70% of the people in this country have not had that experience. And I'm not knocking them for it, because it costs too much. And quite honestly, in some cases, it's not even worth it, because you can find what you love and don't have to drown yourself in schoolwork or student loan debt and interest. But when you make it real simple, when you make life real simple, just go to work here, punch in at 9 o'clock, punch out at 5 o'clock, find a person, marry the person, make people, with that person, the person that you found, and then you marry, and then you guys do things and you make other people and you raise your other people and just rinse and repeat. That's a simple execution plan. Now it gets more complicated, of course, but at the end of the day, isn't that the story of an awful lot of people in this country? I would say it's probably the story of 70% of the people in this country. And because we want things to be simple, because life and the unpredictability of life is complex enough, we want simple solutions to all of our problems. Fascism offers people a simple solution to complex problems that are rooted in the founding of this nation. Well, if you just all follow the rules and just stop being a rabble rouser, why are you always bringing up race and you're always talking about race? Nobody wants to hear about that. Just everybody get along, and everybody who's causing all this division? Why is there so much division in the world? When people talk like that, because what's happening in the world extends beyond their ability to understand. And again, I'm not faulting these people. And I shouldn't even call them these people because it makes it seem like they're this separate group. But it's how we indoctrinate people into America. Make it simple, make it easy, which means that if your life is simple and your understanding is very elementary, then clearly all of the problems can be solved in a very simple manner as well. That is not the case. It's not the case. And so we're offering these very simple solutions. Well, if we just don't let the Mexicans come here, then our jobs are going to be saved. Well, if the blacks just stay in their neighborhoods, then we're not going to have to deal with them and their issues of crime. If women just stay in the house, they won't have to deal with workplace discrimination. You see what I'm saying? And then do your own comparison. When you talk to people, or maybe you don't talk to them anymore, that have that myopic view of the world, why are people complaining so much? And it's the protesters, and it's the violence, and it's the rioters and the looters, because they have not the ability to understand what causes that pain in people, because their view of our society is simple. Donald Trump offers a simple view. China's been taking our jobs, so we're going to go to China and take our jobs back from China. Problem solved. Illegal immigrants are rapists and murderers. We've got a problem with rape and murder in the country, so we're going to build a wall to stop the rape and murder. Problem solved. These people are in the country illegally. They're a problem. Well, let's kick them all out. Problem solved. He offers a simple solution. What Joe Biden is offering, and it's not him. It's those that create the political party around him that he is now carrying the banner for. So take him out of it. Him could be replaced with anybody. Him used to be a her in Hillary Clinton, but y'all didn't want her carrying the banner for the party or for the country. Okay? You made your point by not liking Hillary. We loud and clear. It is trying to figure out how to navigate a whole nation that we want to trust our leaders that are elected democratically to lead the nation through a very complex series of problems and issues. And maybe some folks think that women aren't equipped intellectually, which is weird because we all love and respect our mothers and our grandmothers. And you ask any person on earth, some of the most important people to them are women, except when you put that woman in a leadership role, which is unusual. But again, that's people looking for the really easy and simple way. And Donald Trump offers that. He allows people to be comfortable in their lack of understanding and in their ignorance, because when the president of the United States doesn't wear a mask, he is saying, well, essentially, I don't understand science. I don't really understand virology or microbiology, even though I'm supposed to hire people and select people that do understand virology and microbiology and all this other stuff. And I don't really know what they're talking about. So I'm just not going to do what they say, because their stuff, the stuff that they say, they use a lot of big words. There's a lot of people in this country that say, you know what, Donald Trump, you're right. I don't know what any of that stuff means either. I never learned about that in my 7th grade social studies class, about how you spread a virus and all this other stuff, this pandemic hoax, which is a Democratic hoax. People are looking for a very simple solution. Don't wear a mask. If you wear a mask, that means you're a Democrat. If you don't wear a mask, you're exercising your freedom, because that's one thing that people do know. No matter what level of education you have, whatever level of understanding you have, if you're America, that means you got some freedom. That's why so many people want to come to this country. Guys, how's my volume level? I'm having all sorts of technical difficulties over here. Like, I can hear myself, but I don't know if you guys can hear me. And my Zoom crashed this morning. It's been a whole thing. Donald Trump is offering a simplicity. I prefer the complex solution because they will be much more long lasting and durable, because there are people that are experts in areas that I know nothing about, because they studied what they loved and they became very good at it. Thank you, Jason. Oh, good morning, Jason. Eileen, good morning, everybody. I got 5 different volume knobs. See, when I used to be on broadcast radio, because I like to reminisce, I had a whole nother person that was over there. Like, they would be over, you guys can't see. And they would handle all this stuff for me. So I'm working on it. I think we've come a long way in 5 months. If you go back to some of my first broadcasts, like, that was like the Stone Ages. Anyways, hiring subject matter experts is a sign of higher level intelligence. Is also a sign of security, because if I know that I don't know about how to build a house, I don't know how to build a house, I know how to live in it. I know how to buy paintings for the wall. But then you hire somebody that knows how to do what you can't do, where you're inefficient or where you have deficiencies. It takes a real strong person to admit they don't know something. The one answer that I hate to give is I don't know. So the answer I prefer to give is I'll find out for you. Because if I don't know, then someone I've found an inefficiency, right? If somebody asks me a question and I don't know the answer, well, I'm going to get the answer, because not only am I going to provide that answer to you, I'm going to provide that answer for myself. Donald Trump and those that he has galvanized don't want to do that. They want to live in a bubble of ignorance, and every bubble that exists is going to burst. And here's the hard part. This is the tough part, especially when I have to deal with the issue of race and racism and white people. I mean, not even me dealing with it personally, because I've been dealing with white folks my entire life. And here's one thing I've noticed about dealing with white folks my entire life. White people are everywhere. They're all over the place. They're most places. Like, if you want to totally avoid white people or their influence, you gotta really try hard. And so I'm used to it. I know how to operate. I know how to navigate. I know what triggers those white people that only have the simple solution in mind. I try to avoid them. When I do engage them, I got to take it down a couple of notches. It's this whole cultural understanding that you have to have when you live in America and you're Black. You know right away what kind of white person you're dealing with. Sometimes you can tell by how they're dressed. And you're not supposed to judge people on the clothes they wear. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. When somebody puts on their clothes, this is how they're presenting themselves to the world. This is the choice they made, maybe with the help of somebody else, but this is the choice they made to go out into the world looking like this. It's nonverbal communication, and it counts. That's why I stopped listening to what Donald Trump does say. I listen to the things he does not say. But he appeals to something that is very, very real and very tangible. And I say that because in the event that he loses, I hope he loses, we're going to have to deal with people that are still looking for a simple solution, because when Democrats take hold and when they put science back in the classroom and science back in America, and we hire real subject matter experts that are going to give Americans another set of instructions that are going to be so complicated, even really smart people are not going to be able to understand how we navigate in this new world. It's going to be jobs, it's going to be the economy, it's going to be how we tackle climate change. The reason why Americans are so slow to grasp onto the threat of climate change, and myself included, and I admitted this was a serious deficiency and a blind spot that I had, because I just didn't know. I was like, oh, it's warm out today. Ha ha ha, must be global warming. Shut up, Sherwin. Don't say that. That's stupid. It's because it's so complex. And if you want to live a simple life because you think that will reduce your stress and your burden, and you don't want to think about all these really complicated and difficult things, there is a bubble in which you can live in which you feel protected. And that is why when you take people out of, we call this thing a comfort zone. take somebody out of their comfort zone. I don't like being taken out of my comfort zone. But what happens when you get taken out of your comfort zone? Sometimes you ain't got a choice. You know, the first place that people are really taken out of their comfort zone is at a new job. You don't know anybody, they don't know you, never worked with these people before. They don't know your name, they don't know your history, your background, your resume. They just look at how you're dressed, what you look like. But what happens? You learn, you adapt, or adopt. And then you look back, don't you? Like, oh man, I remember my first day here. I hated everybody. I didn't know you. You didn't know me. I got taken out of my comfort zone because it's scary. And you have to have a level of security and self-esteem to be able to maintain your wits when you are entirely uncomfortable. When you walk into a room, and some people can relate to this more than others, so I'm just going to leave it broad and open-ended. When you walk into a room and you're the only one, you could be the only man, you could be the only woman, you could be the only immigrant, you could be the only African American. And here's my favorite: when you're the only white person. I got a lot of white friends, so clearly I'm not racist. Is that what they say? So I'm hanging out with white people, and I've known them my whole life. Like my white friends, like I'm still friends with some of my white friends that I grew up with, like kindergarten, first grade, middle school, because we all went to the same school system, and we're still just around. Like we're not dead, we're still connected, and they feel comfortable around me. I feel comfortable around them, but it took our entire lives, I guess, to be that way. And they'll invite me to something. Hey, Sherwin, we're having a thing. You want to come to the thing? We're having a thing in my house or somebody's birthday, and we're going to have a thing. Yeah, I'll go. Who's going to be there? Because that's an important question, isn't it? Always find out who's going to be there before you commit to go. Billy and Johnny and Tracy and Stacy and Lacey and Melissa. There's always going to be a Melissa there. Shout out to the Melissas that may be in this room. And so, yeah, sure, I'll go. And then I go, and I'm the only black person. I might know these people, right? I might have grown up with them, went to school with them, we're celebrating somebody's birthday, a mutual friend, but I'm still the only black person. You notice it, you feel it immediately, and even though you know the people, you're still out of your comfort zone. You get used to it. You find a couple of people that you know better than the others, you hang out with them, you chat with them, everything is good, and you're drunk and having a good time. Now, when the tables are turned, I call one of my white friends. Hey, white friend, whatever their name is, you fill in the blank. So and so is having a little thing. Want to come to the thing? Oh yeah, I'll go. That's what my white friend says. Yeah, I'll go to the thing. Who? And the white friend will say, "Who's going to be there?" Um, Jerome and Tyrone and Demetrius and Demarius and other black names. Oh sure, yeah, I'll go. Whatever, it's fine. And so my white friend shows up. And even though they may know some of the black people that are in the room, they don't know all the black people that are in the room. And we're all there for the same reason. We're celebrating somebody's birthday or whatever the case may be. They're way more nervous being the only white person than I was when I was the only black person because they're not used to it. And immediately, because I'm the black person that invited them, it's like, Sherwin, am I going to be okay here? And I'm not exaggerating when they say that. I was like, I don't know. Do you know something I don't? Why wouldn't you be okay here? Well, I just don't, you know what I mean. No, I totally don't know what you mean, even though I know exactly what they mean. And I want them to explore that space of when you feel like you're the only one. Because in America, where there's still 193 white people, it's incredibly rare where a white person who goes into a place or goes into a space and they're the only one, unless they are doing it willingly and by choice. But most people don't have that experience. And so the anxiety that they may feel being the only white person, because what happens is every stereotype they've ever heard from their mother, their grandmother, their parents, their teachers, their employers about black people hits them all at once because, wow, maybe one of these black people is the kind of common criminal thug that I've heard about. That is the power of race and how black people are far more equipped to be tolerant of other folks because we have to be than other folks are tolerant of us. I've even had some of my white friends say, oh, no, I'm busy. I can't go. Because they don't want to be the only one. because they want to live in this bubble of simplicity. And the further along we go, the more years pass, the more years that put where this nation is today from when the Constitution was created and ratified, the more diverse this country is going to be. So there's essentially going to be one of two choices. One of them is Donald Trump can stop the census count, which he ordered the Supreme Court to take up, and they did. So I think the last day to fill out your census was yesterday. That's why we've been telling y'all since what, March, April? It's October. Filling out the census took 3 minutes. And if you didn't do it, well, we're going to lose funding for our community, but more on that later. And so you either try to completely eliminate, eradicate, and diminish minorities because as time goes on, the word minority is going to be used for another race and another group of people in this country. Or you stop being afraid at a boogeyman that was created out of thin air. When is White History Month? Anybody know when that is? Just curious. Is there a white? Anybody know that? Answer to that. Whiteness doesn't exist. You can be German, Polish, Italian, Russian, French, and celebrate your culture and your heritage from being Welsh or being Scottish and have a real nationality. This is where your grandparents are from, or somebody came over here on a boat, right? We want you to celebrate that. I think it's dope because as Black people, we don't have that. Not as African Americans that are multi-generational. And so my family can trace roots in this country back to 1790. And trust me, when those roots started, it wasn't fun. Like it wasn't a pleasant experience. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to go to a new country. It sucked. And I'm being diplomatic when I say it sucked. But I can't go to the town in Ireland that bears my namesake, or the English hamlet where my great grandfather was making spears because he was a blacksmith. We don't have that. And we want people to be able to celebrate that, full stop. But what happens is this, they shed that, like they stop caring about the actual history of their family. And they trade it off for whiteness, which was created here. Whiteness means you have a physical, visible advantage over somebody else, and people are celebrating that. I'm proud to be white, they say. Fair enough. If you're proud to be white, then have your pride. But when they say that, they're using the concept of whiteness that was created to separate and to marginalize the people who are in the heavy majority from everybody else. And so white history as a concept shouldn't exist. But then we also look at Africa, because like African history is kind of like, it's a continent. But we don't have, as Black people, well, I should say we don't have it. It's extremely difficult. And I don't do the whole 23andMe, Ancestry.com. What's the other one? 99 problems, but a genetic ain't one. There's a whole bunch of these different services where you swab your mouth and you send it to a lab. Oh, y'all are going to regret you did that. And maybe it satisfies this curiosity that we have about where we came from, because nobody wants to believe the history in this country started from bondage, from slavery, from not being a human being. I've accepted that, and while it's painful, it's also a story of triumph unlike any other. And I know that there's some other people who have stories of triumph in their families, because it always starts with an immigrant that came over with nothing from some European country, where the hardest part was like the boat ride. You know what I'm saying? Like the toughest thing they had to endure was a boat. And then they came to the country and they didn't know the language. Like that was the toughest shit you had to endure, a boat ride and having to learn a language. But they had nothing. They had whiteness. which means it was maybe a generation, if that, to where the children and the grandchildren were perfectly suited to be Americans. Some of the issues and troubles that my ancestors had in the beginning in 1790, I have today. I couldn't shed the negative connotation of blackness in a couple of generations, even if I try and indoctrinate myself to where white people feel comfortable with me, doesn't matter. And so I walk in that skin of owning my blackness and the fact that my ancestors were slaves, but at the same time, they built the country. They built a country that I have just as much right to as anybody else that came over on a like choppy boat ride and didn't learn the language. It is a story of incredible victory because in a real short period of time, Black people went from not being a person to being a person to running for office to building to creating to engineering and then becoming president. And that stands in this incredible contrast to what Donald Trump wants America to be, this simplistic view that everybody is supposed to be exactly the same if your skin is light. You act the same, you talk the same, you follow the same rules. We hate the same people. Get to some comments. Good morning. Justin, he says, I get much more anxiety about that now as an adult than I did as a kid. I was the only white kid in my boys and girls club choir and gospel choir, and it was totally okay. Well, look, if you're a white guy in a gospel choir, shout out to you. I wish I could sing. I can't. I'm terrible. I would sing for you, but my neighbors would call the police. They don't call the police when I play loud music or when I barbecue and have friends over late at night, which I used to do pre-quarantine, but if I sang, they call the cops. Justin goes on to say, but now, if I were invited to a party like that, if I was the only white guy, I would be so nervous about saying the wrong thing or fitting in. I need you to know something, Justin and everybody else. We know that. We know it. We know that, and we can notice it because Black people have to be really intuitive because if we start reading the tea leaves and the signs, if we're in a certain place and all of a sudden people are looking at us and we feel something, we know that it's time to leave. And so when we interact with white people, because Black people, I don't want to stereotype here, but chances are we've had a lot more interactions with whites than white people have had with us because when we go to the bank, when we apply for a loan, when we apply for a job, when we get pulled over by the police, our teachers, our professors, our contractors sometimes, because Black people don't perform all the contracting duties that you may need if you're a homeowner, et cetera. So we've had a lot of different varied experiences with different kinds of white people. And some white people are cool as hell. Some are not, but that's just people. We know that you might be nervous in picking your words because we have just so indoctrinated everybody into this cultural understanding of America that white people have been saying terms that are offensive and they had no idea. And it was just a normal part of their language because when you're surrounded by people that are just like you can use that word. You can feel it doesn't necessarily have to be the N word. It could be colored. Like I still hear white people say, well, you know, the coloreds. I'm like, oh, damn it. Now I got to bring them. I literally, when I bring them up to speed, I got to start at like 1940 because we were colored, then we were Negro, then we were Black, then like African got mixed into it, which is kind of confusing as well because Africa is like also Libya. Africa is Morocco. But Africa is also South Africa. So it's kind of confusing because we can't say, you know, I'm from Ghana or I'm from Liberia. Like we don't know necessarily where we're from. So we just take the whole continent as ours. But no, we know that white people can have some anxiety in talking to us. And so here's the totally acceptable thing to do. But a lot of people won't do it because it makes them look like they're ignorant. But everybody's ignorant, so it's cool. It shows more strength when you can admit stuff you don't know. Just pull the Black person aside, find you a Black. No, let me not say that. Because when a white person found them a Black in history, it had a whole different meaning. And just ask, like, hey, is this word offensive? Or, what should I say? I think it shows a willingness to want to understand, because so many people will never ask. Because then here's what happens. If you're like, okay, can I say this? I don't want to offend anybody. Well, like, okay, cool. So here's what's acceptable. And this is what happens from that point forward. So when you find yourself in a room full of black folks, because you had that simple 3-minute conversation about what is and isn't acceptable terminology, and what is and what is not offensive, what you should bring up, what you shouldn't bring up, because we will talk about race with white people. It's just white people don't want to explore a space in which they think they don't have to deal with it. That's how we get an understanding. But when you have that conversation about what's offensive, what's not offensive, then the next time you're in a room full of black people, because you already had the conversation. You can be much more comfortable. And I'm not expecting everybody to do that, but Denise Jones, good morning, Denise. We have been bi culture for a long time. Oh, totally. Totally been. Well, you have to be. Even though I grew up where I grew up, when I grew up, my home was black. Walked in and black people's houses have a smell of soul. There was a straightening comb on the stove. There were Marvin Gaye records, on the record player, back when people had a record player in the living room. Teddy Pendergrass albums, the Isley Brothers, that was the music that was playing. Come home from church and you have dinner at 2:00, right? Technically brunch, but like brunch was a new concept that got invented maybe in the 90s. I don't know what brunch really is, but that's just what my home was. And I went out into the world, I had to put on a different suit of armor, and black people have to put on that suit of armor. You get dressed for the day, you get ready for the day. You never know who you're going to deal with, who's going to interact with you in a foul manner, and you got to be prepared for that all of the time. It is a luxury, and therefore I will call it a privilege to be white and never have to think about it. What do white people have to think about what other white people are going to think of them because they're white? They may think differently because of the car they drive, or how they talk, or their accent, or the shoes they're wearing, but not their skin color. Because all those other things you can change. If you get judged by the car you drive, get a different car. If people don't like your shoes, get different shoes. If people don't like the color of your goddamn tie, change your tie. I can't change the wideness of this nose or the fullness of these lips. And so I got to be prepared for somebody else's ignorance toward me. And therefore, it is a privilege to have your life be hard and difficult because of your bad decisions. That's number one. But it's a privilege to have your life be hard and difficult only because of your bad decisions, not because of the color of your skin. Justin says that is truly a part of my white privilege. Every day is white history. I wish it was more. Well, we had this. We used to have these things in Milwaukee, these cultural celebrations, these ethnic festivals. They start the festival season, and it starts in June with Pride Fest, and then you have Mexican Fiesta, Festa Italiana, Irish Fest, German Fest, Polish Fest, Asian Moon Fest. We got our Native Americans. They had one too, and you have all of these cultural exhibitions at our festival park on the lakefront. We don't have that anymore because of the Rona. But I always found it very, very weird in a city that is as segregated as Milwaukee is. We would celebrate, and it's a weekend. It's a whole weekend, and it's all summer long. It's really a wonderful idea, and I believe we're the only city that does something like that. Like every weekend starting in June, the gays kick it off, because if you're going to have a festival season kickoff, you must start with the gays. It's a no-brainer there. And so in each festival, there's a parade, and then you go to the festival grounds, and there's food and dancing and music and alcohol. And so if you don't want to go into the traditional neighborhoods of those people, because Milwaukee is a city of a whole bunch of neighborhoods, there's dozens of neighborhoods, but there's history to that because different ethnicities settled in those neighborhoods and they named them. The neighborhoods have names, and that goes back to the people that were allowed to live there by the landowners, right? Certain races of people couldn't live in certain areas, certain races could, certain cultures could, certain nationalities could. And so they named and gave a real cultural stamp, a cultural identity to their neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods still exist. Mine is a little less creative. It's called the St. Joseph's neighborhood because that's the name of the damn hospital, but okay, whatever. And so if you didn't necessarily want to travel outside of your comfort zone, you could go to their festival. And it's like a crash course in history about people that you were traditionally segregated from. Milwaukee didn't just segregate people by race. We segregated people by nationality, by language, etc. But we have these ethnic festivals in a city that's segregated, and they're incredibly popular because you may not know much about the Greeks or the Italian or the Irish. You didn't grow up with any, you didn't go to church with any, you didn't go to school with any, but you can go and party with them when they have their weekend festival. Here's what I find so damaging about that. And all of those different ethnicities and nationalities and cultures still have their festivals. When we had the festival park open, but there's no African World Festival. It used to be called Afrofest, then it was African World Festival. But for some reason, the largest ethnic and or minority group in the city of Milwaukee, I think it could be Latino now, but we're always neck and neck. The largest festival that we have of the largest minority community that we have in the city, and I would argue the most misunderstood community. We lost our festival in like 2010, but all of the other festivals were able to persist. And I can go into a long soliloquy about why that is, but I can assure you that and there's financial troubles because sometimes these festivals, because they're not put on to make money. I mean, they try to make money, they charge the vendors, rent, and then whoever is sponsoring the event, they've got to pay a tremendous amount of fees to use the festival park space. You got to hire their security, you got to hire their union contractors to do all the wiring, the electrical, if you want to have generators and power. It's a whole thing. Oh, it's a thing. It's so complicated. It's very expensive. But sometimes the Irish community, just as an example, I don't know why I'm picking on the Irish today. The people that are sponsoring the Irish Festival, the Cultural Heritage Foundation of the Irish, or whatever it's called, they may have had a bad year because they're all nonprofits. And they just don't have the money to rent the festival space and then hire the contractors to do all the electrical and have all the generators so you can have power, so you can have a stage, so you can have lights. They may not have the money for a festival, but they will do whatever it takes, right? Or they'll reach out to people to make sure that they have an Irish festival. Here's an example. Mayor Tom Barrett, who I believe is of Irish descent, because Barrett, I believe, is an Irish last name. If Irish Fest was lacking the funds it needed to put on its weekend-long cultural exhibition at the Summerfest grounds, Tom Barrett would find some money. He might write something out of the city budget to make sure that that festival persisted. If the Italians, who are not lacking for money, we can have a whole conversation about them too. If the Italian Community Center, which I don't think it's them who puts on their Italian Festa Italiana, if they had a bad year, didn't have the money to rent the festival space and hire all the contractors and all the people to put together all the generators they need for powers and stages, and they didn't have the money to hire the entertainment, they would reach deep into their community or other elected officials that are of Italian descent. Hey, we need some money to make sure that we have our festival put on this year. But with African Americans, this one is a bit more difficult because we can't just reach into our community and get money from our community to put on the festival. Because here's the thing. African World Festival, Festa Italiana, Mexican Fiesta, Asian Moon Fest is not for the people of that culture. It's not for them. It's for everybody else. Black people don't need African World Festival for Black people. We need it for everybody else so you can understand our culture and our heritage. So when you ask us for money for African World Festival, we're reluctant to reach in our pockets to put on an exhibition, to put on a show for a weekend, showcasing our culture and our history and the beauty of Africa. It's hard for us to give money to put on that show for white people. But the Italians, the Irish, the German, the Polish, because they don't want to be misunderstood, because there was a period of time where they were discriminated against too. Oh, I love how the Italians talk about there was racism against the Italians. No, they just didn't think you were white enough. Italians were niggers too, and I never let them forget it, because sometimes Italians, they get a little lippy. And I'm not stereotyping Italians. I have Italian friends, but they sometimes forget that there were signs, no dogs, no Italians, no blacks. And so I don't let them forget. But the reason why they want to reach deep in their pockets to put on these festivals, because if you are white, you never want to be discriminated against by white people. So we need to show the Polish and the Irish and the Germans and the English and the French. We even have Bastille Day. Bastille Day just takes over downtown and get a good section of it. That's when the French people, they did a riot. The French people looted. Let them eat cake. And they're like, oh, we don't have any cake, so we're going to take your cake. Because they want to show who they are to other groups of people that are known for discrimination. And black people are just like, screw it. I'm not going to pay money or contribute money to put on a show for, and we should, but I'm giving you the reasons why I think that we don't. Because even at the end of the day, if we have the most beautiful, wonderful African World Festival and we are telling every bit and piece of our culture and our story that's not being told in schools, we're still going to get discriminated against anyway. We're still going to get pulled over by the police. We're still going to get racially profiled. We're still going to get followed in the stores. And we can't be like, hey, did you go to African World Festival? Because you would know much more about us and our heritage and our history. That don't matter. Eileen Seeger, I love to live in a space in the city where my neighbors do not look like me. Sadly, my quote, exposure to Black people growing up was watching the Jeffersons. I wanted to live next to the Jeffersons. No, I don't think you really wanted to live next to George Jefferson because he wasn't too keen on the whites. George Jefferson was not. I think that I've witnessed these different phases in American popular culture. And so I grew up in the 90s, and I'll fight you on this. The 90s were the best human decade pretty much ever. And I'm going to tell you why. And it wasn't because of the 1994 crime bill, but I have a feeling that we need to have that discussion too, because, as we get closer to the election and even the part of the town halls that I saw last night, which were just, I got to stop watching that stuff because I'm just, you guys watch the debates and I'm going to watch the next debate if Donald Trump decides to show up. But Donald Trump, I want you to know he hijacked NBC because if there's a committee, a very respected nonpartisan committee that puts on the presidential debates. I think it's called the Presidential Debate Committee. They set the rules. They always have. Since we've had televised presidential debates, 1960 was the first one, Richard Nixon versus JFK, and JFK was able to win over the American people, just barely. JFK only won by the equivalent of one vote in every precinct in America because people didn't want to vote for a Catholic, because they thought that John F. Kennedy, being the first Catholic Democratic nominee, would take his political guidance from the Pope. How ridiculous is that? And if you really knew the story of John F. Kennedy, he wasn't a very good practicing Catholic, except for maybe he didn't use birth control, but whatever. But when people saw him and his demeanor and his confidence next to Richard Nixon on that television screen, and Nixon, he looked nervous and he looked rattled, and Nixon was sweating, people went with JFK. I mean, there's other reasons as well. But John F. Kennedy was discriminated against because he was a Catholic. And now you look at the U.S. Supreme Court, when Barrett gets confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court, she will be the 7th of 9 justices that are either a practicing Roman Catholic or grew up Roman Catholic. My, oh my, how times have changed. Even Clarence Thomas grew up Catholic. I swear I was going somewhere with this. Oh yeah, the 90s. The 90s were a transformative decade because, so there's always the economy. I got to start with the economy. So Bill Clinton, who I think ushered in the 90s and the style of Bill Clinton, the Clintons actually. There was a kid in the White House once again. We hadn't seen a kid in the White House since the Kennedys. And Bill Clinton had charisma, he had panache, he had style. He went on the Arsenio Hall show and played the saxophone. For the first time, we heard an American president admitting to some kind of use of marijuana, even though he didn't inhale. But I need you to know that started the anti-marijuana prohibition movement. It put it into overdrive because now you got a baby boomer president who had long hair in the 60s that admitted to putting a joint up to his lips. I start with the economy because George H.W. Bush lost. He did not get reelected to a second term because the economy tanked. And what happened in the 1990s is that the economy was doing so well that all boats were lifted. Whether we attribute that to Bill Clinton and Al Gore's economic policies, I don't know. But at the same time, you had this beautiful proliferation of Black culture. Hip hop became a global phenomenon. It was everywhere. It was popular music. And when you had songs like Walk This Way, when hard rockers Aerosmith worked with Run DMC to create a literal masterpiece, and when Chuck D and Public Enemy worked with Anthrax to create a song called Bring the Noise, it was a melding and a collaboration of separate musical cultures. Radio, and this is why I've always had such an affinity for it, has always been a great integrator, because even in the segregated South, white kids would listen to the Black radio stations. They listen to the commentary of the DJs on the radio station, listening to James Brown and other music of the time. They couldn't go see a James Brown concert in person, but they could listen to it on the radio. And here's the power of Black radio back in the Jim Crow era. They knew that Black music, even back then, always had this incredible appeal. And that's evident because if you look at some of the white music, like Elvis was just the white James Brown, even though I think Elvis came first. So Elvis was like the white Little Richard, I should say. And Little Richard had a song called Tutti Frutti, and then Pat Boone had to have a song called Tutti Frutti. Like, they stole so much from us because there's just this natural soulful appeal to Black people and Blackness and Black music and Black culture, because we have no choice but to be authentic, because America doesn't let us hide. And because we have to be authentic because of the beautiful melanin in our skin, there's something very different about us. This is why I kind of feel sorry for the whites, because they came over here from Ellis Island, the ones that arrived that way, and they were so ashamed of who they were and where they came from that they changed their names. They changed their very long and ethnic sounding names to something that was just plain vanilla and very short, because they were ashamed of who they were. But think about the privilege in that. You can shed the skin of your nationality, because if you come to America and you've got a very Italian sounding name, they're going to discriminate against you because you're Italian. So just change your name and you can hide and you can fit in. How horribly devastating that must be. Black people cannot enjoy such a luxury. Even though my name is Sherwin Hughes, and on a lot of applications, they had no idea I was Black. And then when I show up for the job, surprise, shit, I'm Black as hell. Shout out to my parents for coming up with a very unusual name, but I didn't like it at first, but it's cool now. The 90s were so the economy was good, people were getting jobs, wages were going up, and you had this proliferation of Black culture. Who didn't watch The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? Not only was Will Smith a chart-topping hip-hop artist at the time, he had a television show where you could just laugh along with the Black family. As ridiculous as it was, people began to understand this color blindness. But you know what the real show was that did it, this proliferation of Black culture, where Black people were not all of a sudden a threat, that we could live normal lives and raise normal families and have different, careers? The Cosbys. I know you hate Bill Cosby. We canceled him, and probably rightfully so. That one hurt me because Bill Cosby did so much for us. He had a PhD in education. He was the king of not just stand-up comedy, but television. Who didn't watch Fat Albert? Which were a bunch of Black kids who lived in a junkyard, but it didn't matter. It was just this proliferation of Black culture that I think crescendoed in the 90s, because Black people then weren't a political threat. We were just about a bunch of fun because the Black people have music and hip hop music and dancing and all that other stuff. We weren't seen as a threat. But what happens after that, and so Rodney King was also a lightning rod of the 1990s as well. Even though there was this proliferation of Black culture and people were emulating Black people. I can remember the teen dance clubs that used to exist, and Justin knows that I can go on and on and on about this. In fact, I wrote an article many years ago in onmilwaukee.com called Milwaukee's Generation X. I think it's still lurking somewhere on the internet. Diversity in this city was more and more acceptable then than it is now. Northridge Mall was as much Asian as it was Black, as it was Latino, as it was white. Now it's empty. The teen dance clubs that I went to, and there was tons of them. There was a Tijuana Yacht Club, there was Zippers, there was Bailey's, there was the Attic West. I know I'm forgetting some. It would bring kids from all over, from Heartland and Hartford and Germantown and Menominee Falls, and then we would all just come together and just dance and have a good time, because this is the Generation X in the 1990s was the first generation that could finally spread its wings and explore other places and spaces that had been off limits to our parents. And people got to know each other. That's why I'm still friends with some of these people to this day, because we had legislation and court decisions behind us encouraging people to get together and to work together. And you can't do housing covenants anymore. And my parents moved out to Brown Deer so we could live amongst everybody else and just live a normal suburban American lifestyle. But also the Cosbys and shows like it that came into people's living rooms every Thursday night at 7 o'clock made America feel comfortable with the working class, middle class African American. And that is the generation that formed me. That's why I could say that, I just have friends. They're different races. I mean, I was going to school with Muslim kids in fifth grade and Asian kids and Puerto Ricans and Mexicans my entire life. And so when I got onto the real world, seeing those people wasn't a shock to me. Hell, we talk about recipes. But then as the world did another unusual change, that 90s thing, if you're a 90s kid, really, I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, but became an adult and graduated from college and all that stuff in the 90s. It's still in you, and you still have that mindset. But there's a closeness of Generation X that I don't know that other generations share, because we were the first beneficiaries of the real, true progress of the civil rights movement, meaning that we could integrate. Schools were desegregated a little bit more than they were in the 80s, and certainly more than the 70s, 60s, and 50s. And also, we were the first generation where both parents had to work. Like, it was rare that there was a mom that stayed home if you grew up in the 80s and the 90s, because women were now allowed in the workplace. Because before that, there's a whole bunch of jobs that women couldn't do. And so with our parents being in the workplace, not only is that a solid and not every household, of course, but you have the possibility of two incomes because mom could work and she wanted to work. And sometimes she made more money than dad, but it also created a generation where we were all latchkey kids. We were all home from school at the same time and nobody's parents were home. I can go into a whole conversation about that. But then you have this other thing. So the Berlin Wall comes down, and then now we have this true like global society, global economy, because now there's no wall separating Europe. And then you have a whole bunch of societal changes, not just over there, but also here. But then you have this other phenomenon that comes right around the mid 90s, and that's the internet. Things changed yet again. It brought so people that were separated and segregated because of Jim Crow could now come together in real life, right? So you can mix and mingle and move places and go places, and kids could go and hang out at the shopping mall, even though there's a bunch of Black kids and Latino kids there. They would just end up making out in the parking lot. There was never really any trouble because of diversity. But the internet did something else. And so it brought the world together even more and more and more and more. And then you have the creation of and the fortification of many different subcultures. And while all this is going on, the world is coming together, the Berlin Wall is coming down, you have the internet. I can chat with somebody in Japan on the internet. Those of you that remember the original version of AOL, the whole world changed when you logged in and you heard, "You've got mail." Remember that? It was such an exciting sound, how simple we were back then. Log into AOL. And you hear the dial-up sound. Whatever those dial-up sounds were. Remember that? And then somebody picked up the phone while you were using the phone line to dial up on the internet. There's a whole generation of kids that'll never know the pain of having your internet connection interrupted because your mother got to use the phone. Hater. I'm over here talking to a girl who lives in Afghanistan, Pakistan on the internet. Mom's had to pick up the phone and ruin my love connection. But while all this was going on, this combining of cultures. The Berlin Wall comes down. There's no more communism anymore. America wins the Cold War. Cold War. We have the internet. There are still groups of people that hated it. They hated the diversity. They still hated blacks. They still hated immigrants. They still hated Mexicans. And now they can find each other. Because before they couldn't really find each other, or they could, but it was a little bit more difficult. Now they can organize in secret. And I can go on and on and on about that. But now every subculture that exists, whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether they're Protestant, Catholic, secular, non-secular, anything, they can exist, they can grow, and they can raise money. And it is that counterculture that has found a way to radicalize and indoctrinate more people. And it's very slick how it happens. It's also very subtle. Because of all of this diversity and the coming together of people, they feel threatened because now it's a demographic problem. Now, as time goes on, there are less and less white people and more non-white people, and they feel threatened. And so if they feel threatened, they can find other people to feel threatened. And some people are threatened because like they're not on a solid economic footing. Maybe they lost their job because of the Rona. Whenever there's a major economic disaster, and that's why I started with talking about the economy in the 1990s, because when the economy is good, we can either ignore social problems or we can fund them to such a way to where they don't exist anymore. But then the 1994 crime bill did a little bit of both, some of column A, some of column B. I meant to talk about that, but we got time to talk about the 1994 crime bill because I think a lot of y'all have it misunderstood. So whenever there's like economic calamity and people feel like it's horrible, it's nerve-wracking, you don't know how you're going to pay your bills, you might be getting evicted. Someone can say in that vulnerable moment to people, and this happened in the 1980s, and I learned this from a reformed white nationalist who used to call into my broadcast radio show, and I would just talk to this guy. Sometimes we would talk for an hour, and I didn't know him. He was just a random caller, and he took me through how he, in the 1980s, got indoctrinated and got radicalized by the Aryan Nation, it was. And neo-Nazis or a whole bunch of other groups that we just thought were kooky. Like, oh, you like an idiot wearing with a shaved head, a skinhead with a Nazi flag. And by the way, the skinheads, the original skinheads, the Rude Boys, are peace-loving and they hate Nazis, but the Nazis stole the whole motif of the skinheads. I remember that whole thing going to Northridge Mall in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and you could tell what kind of skinhead they were because they all wore Doc Marten boots, the good skinheads and the bad skin, like the Wicked Witch of the East and the Good Witch of the West, the Good Witch of the North. There were different skins. But that was a counterculture that was able to really proliferate and form even stronger connections and ties all over the world with the internet. But skinheads that wore different colored laces told you what kind of skin they were. It's you guys should study that. It's really fascinating. But anyway, this guy would call on my radio show, and he said, well, because in the 1980s, because of Reaganomics, a lot of family farms went bankrupt. And he came from a small farming community in Iowa. And he was like, they would drop leaflets and pamphlets and they would say, you're losing your farm is getting foreclosed on. What are you going to do? You should probably work with us so we can solidify a future for the white race. Because at the same time, you have African-American families that are starting to do better. You've got 2-income households, and Black people can take advantage of, moving into the suburbs because housing covenants had been made illegal for 20 years now. And so these people that were broken economically, those farming, and this is just one example, but how you can take advantage of somebody's economic worries and turn them into racial fear. And that is happening right now. Loretta Cunningham says, I agree. I grew up in the 80s, but love the 90s. Man, the 90s were just, if you think the 90s and if you don't hear CNC Music Factory playing in the back of your head, then we can't be friends. Let me tell you something. Let me hear Back to Life by Soul II Soul. I don't care where I'm at. You understand me? Back to life. Wait a minute. Don't bring the 90s out in old Sherwin. I swear to God, I'll get up and do the Running Man right now. Am I wearing pants? You'll never know. You can turn economic worries and woes into racial fears, right? The economy now that's very tilted toward rich people, you can just tell poor white people that it's not the rich people that like the money that you're supposed to have to feed your family and to pay your rent, to pay your mortgage, to pay your bills. Rich people have it in their bank accounts. Rich people have your money in the stock market. I need you to understand that. But what Donald Trump can do, because remember, he wants to make everything so simple, he'll tell you that Mexicans who don't know the language, who don't have any papers or any citizenship, don't have a right to vote in any of our elections, that they're the ones taking your jobs. No, it's rich people. Lemon Harris said Pat Boone recorded Little Richard songs because white stations wouldn't play race music. You know what? You're right, Lemon. But white kids would listen to the black radio station. And there's a radio station that was in Memphis, Tennessee. And I used to remember the call letters, but I can't remember it. But he had a jazz and a blues show, and also played contemporary black music at the time in the 1950s. I think it might have been the 40s, 50s, and 1960s. And he knew that white kids were listening to that radio station because of the music. And so what he would do, because radio DJs will sometimes they'll talk, they'll do segments. And because he knew that white kids in Memphis, Tennessee were listening to the music he was playing, he would inject in them messages of equality for black people in a very covert way. It was beautiful, because there is a way in which we can indoctrinate people for the positive. You can create an entire generation of peace-loving, freedom-loving hippies that are anti-racist, because you can give them subtle messages while they're being entertained, while they're listening to the radio and they listen to the DJ, whatever he's saying. And you have to be very covert with your words, but you can actually ease people's fears and anxieties. That is why the Black comedian, I think, is the last form of real, true, free speech, art, and sociology teaching in America. Because we're going to teach you while you're laughing, and you're much more likely to remember it because the entire experience was pleasant. Karen Siegler says we're also the smallest generation. We sure are. In fact, I don't even know how we got here, because the birth control pill was invented in either 63 or 66, and Generation X didn't start until 64 or 65. So if you were born between 1965 and 1980, your parents either really, really wanted you, or you fell out of the sky. Because the generation, and I think that explains why. Well, we're smaller for a couple of reasons. So you got 60, either 63 or 66. It could be 1960, actually. I used to be like an encyclopedia with historical dates, but now I'm getting older. And then you have Roe in 1973. So just think about how that can have an effect on society. There was another thing that happened in the 1990s that we don't really look at from this perspective, and there's a whole bunch of write-ups on it. So they say it's because of the 1994 crime bill, and even though we had spikes in violent crime in big cities because of the crack epidemic, crime actually went down in the 90s. And some of that can be attributed to more people were working, there were more jobs, and the economy was exploding because Bill Clinton and Al Gore did leave George W. Bush one hell of an economy in the year 2000. But what did Bush do? He gave all the money away to rich people, and then started like 17 wars, one of which I think we're still in. But the 1990s and the economy and the bringing together and the coming together of races created this particular phenomenon where crime was actually starting to go down. And there also was a part of the 1994 crime bill where there was two things. More police got put on the streets. States were given billions of dollars to build prisons because we had new laws. And if you have new laws, you're going to get more people locked up in jail. That didn't necessarily have this diminishing effect on crime like the economy did, but crime actually went down in the 90s. It did. You can look at so many different articles and different, studies that say essentially the same thing. But one of the reasons why, and I'm going to end on this because this is going to give y'all something to think about. And I totally was going to talk about the dueling town halls, but screw that. Who cares? Crime went down because within the confines of Generation X and the children that would have been born, imagine there was no birth control pill and there was no Roe versus Wade in 1973. And I'm not pronouncing any judgments on abortion whatsoever, because I'm a man. So it's just, I guess we can have opinions, but who cares? Because men just don't have to deal with a lot of things that women have to deal with. And I don't want to make it worse by injecting my opinion. because of the birth control pill and because of Roe versus Wade in 1973, unwanted pregnancies that would have happened prior to those things, prior to Roe in 73 and the invention of the birth control pill, oral contraception, let me say that. Unwanted children weren't carried to term. When children are unwanted and when children are unloved, they are much more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. So those children that weren't wanted weren't born. Meaning that in the 1990s, you can see a decrease in crime because women that may have gotten pregnant after oral contraception or after the constitutionality of Roe versus Wade didn't have unwanted, unloved children that would ultimately get themselves involved in a number of criminal endeavors because that's what unloved children become. Thank you guys for listening. I hope the volume was a little bit better. I'm gonna have to listen to the playback on this. And if you haven't, subscribe to our YouTube channel. The channel has grown tremendously in the 1 month and 3 days that we've been broadcasting exclusively on YouTube. I appreciate that. But if you hit the subscribe button, that helps even more. Have yourselves a wonderful weekend. And as always, guys, please wear a mask, and wash your hands, and all that other stuff.